Okay, morning everyone. Hard to see everyone with these shining bright lights. So I'm going to talk about something I came across last year actually, which enabled me to develop, sounds a bit suspect, but basically a Wi-Fi-based IMSI catcher. So this is work that I primarily did, and Ravi, also at Oxford, he helped out a bit on the later stages. So, overview of the talk. Well, what's an IMSI? I guess quite a few of you probably know what an IMSI is. It's just basically the International Mobile Subscriber Identity. I'll go into a bit more detail about it. Then we'll talk about conventional IMSI catchers. It's been knocking around for a long time, things like stingrays and all that. And then details on the technique that I developed to essentially develop a Wi-Fi-based IMSI catcher. And these two little bombs, problems with these two mechanisms that are used over Wi-Fi now on most smartphones. Wi-Fi network authentication, basically when mobiles connect to operator-run Wi-Fi hotspots, and Wi-Fi calling. Then looking at operator mitigations and user mitigations, and actually, well, then I'm probably not going to do a demo, sadly, but unless there's a big shout for it. So, what's an IMSI? It's this 15-digit number. It sort of breaks down. You've got first 3 digits mobile country code, and then the second one is the mobile network operator, and then you've got the individual mobile identifier. And it basically allows for a mutual authentication of a device, like your mobile phone, to the network. And so you've got the IMSI. It's kind of like your user ID, unique on the global sort of telephone network. And then the other crucial piece of information that is also required is something called the secret authentication key, KI, which is stored inside the SIM card and is also stored at the operator sort of subscriber server. That's in 2G. All you just need is just the IMSI and the KI. But for 3 and 4G, they then introduce something called the sequence number, which is then shared between the SIM card and the home subscriber server. It provides additional security measures, because basically 2G security kind of sucks, really. But it's still here. Anyway, so it's stored in 2 places. It's in the SIM card, which has sort of various ways of referring to it. The UICC was actually the sort of name for the actual card itself, and then the USIM is actually what they refer to as an app that runs inside runs on the SIM. And if you take a SIM card out of your phone and you stick it into one of these little sort of $2 Chinese shipped USB things, or you can pay a few hundred quid for a SIM reader, you can basically read out a bunch of information off of the SIM card, including the IMSI, there's no sort of protection there. It's read-only. And fortunately, things like the secret key and the sequence number aren't directly readable, so you can carry out cryptographic operations on those by calling certain functions on the SIM, but you can't actually directly extract them from the SIM, so hence it's not easy to clone a SIM. They're tamper-resistant packaging. At the operator, you've got the IMSI and the KI and the rest of them. They're all stored in this HSS AUC, depending on which sort of version of the 3GPP standards we're talking about. And it's also basically an identifier that's sort of been well known for its use in tracking across the world. But then there's a bunch of others as well that's part of your phone, like the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, NFC hardware addresses, like the MAC address. And then you've got the IMEI, International Mobile Equipment Identifier, which uniquely identifies the actual phone hardware itself. And then you've got what's catchily named the MS-ISDN, which is actually just another word for your phone number. Things like MAC addresses, they're starting to see a bit of privacy stuff, so you're starting to see randomization of MAC addresses on Wi-Fi on the kind of the later versions of mobile OSs like iOS and in Android, and you'll see it on some versions of Linux, depending on which drivers and things you're running. So conventional IMSI catchers, well, they basically will track a device based on the IMSI and possibly also the IMEI, and they can determine a location, and they can also typically intercept call SMS data. They operate on the mobile bands, though, so GSM, 3G, 4G, so sort of 900 megahertz, 1800 megahertz. These are licensed spectrum. So essentially how they work is they sort of pop up as a sort of fake base station and of high power, which then lures the mobile devices to attach to it. You can have a sort of passive mode where you just sort of tracking devices, but typically they're active, where they'll intercept calls and track the devices. They're relatively expensive, but believe it or not, you can buy them on Alibaba these days. Just do a quick search, and you'll find them for a couple of grand. But it's also now possible to put yourself up one as well, laptop with SDR, software-defined radio. Things like the cheapest, although won't actually get you an IMSI catcher, but there's something called the RTL SDR that some of you may be familiar with, which is a sort of 15 pounds little dongle that you stick in your machine that was supposed to be for watching telly, but actually turns out it can be used for wideband software-defined radio. Basically, it'll tune into any frequency from about, I can't remember the exact range, but it won't catch Wi-Fi, but it does quite a lot. It's about sort of 200, I can't remember, but it goes to 900. It goes to about 2 gigahertz. It doesn't go to 2.4 gigahertz, but you can look at quite a lot of things with it. Anyway, they've been around for a long time, and the sort of techniques, you've got 2G protocol flaws, and you've got some 3G architecture issues as well. We won't go into too much detail on those guys. Protection against IMSI catchers. There's some recent work. There's a project called Sea Glass Project, came out of the University of Washington, which basically is what they've been doing, driving around in cars and mapping out the frequency spectrum used by all the known kind of base stations, and then watching for anomalies, and then being able to work out whether IMSI catchers are being deployed. There's not really much of protection in terms of the actual phones themselves, non-routed ones. Special phones, things like the sort of black phone purportedly can give you indication of potentially if you're being downgraded. Then there are certain apps for routed phones like Snoop Stitch and Darshak that basically provide you some indication and can do some mapping stuff. Other options, not so handy. Turn off cellular, right. Don't need a mobile phone anymore. But then the Wi-Fi stuff, well, that's what we're getting to. So Wi-Fi-based IMSI catcher, it basically we can track on IMSI and location, but no interception. So far, it operates in the ISM, the industrial and scientific medical bands, unlicensed, basically. So range, few hundred meters, but you could be extended with all kinds of sort of pop cans and what have you. And basically, you can spin up a fake access point and perform some of these attacks that we're going to talk about. Essentially, it's based upon two techniques that are specified in this 3GPP standard, TS33.234, which specifies these two access techniques, which I mentioned briefly at the beginning: Wi-Fi access network authentication, which is termed as WLAN, direct IP access, which is basically operator-run Wi-Fi access points. And then you've got the Wi-Fi calling, known as WLAN 3GPP access, which can be used for other things, but at the moment is used for that. It's low cost. You can just run it on a Pi, this sort of stuff we're talking about. So to give you a brief overview of the mobile network architecture. So we're really talking about these two little red and blue dotted lines. The blue dotted line is just the connection to the AP, which is the operator-run Wi-Fi access points, and then you've got the red dotted line that goes to something called the Edge Packet Data Gateway, which is connected to the mobile infrastructure. And then here's the rest of the sort of mobile management entity and the home subscriber server, and then you've got the Packet Data Gateway over there to the right, takes you onto the internet. So Wi-Fi network attachment, well, basically you've just got unencrypted, just connection to Wi-Fi access points, maybe with a captive portal sort of thrown in. Then you've got normal sort of pre-shared passwords, credentials, maybe pre-shared keys or something. And then you've got the auto-connect encrypted Wi-Fi APs, which is typically, which is specified in this 802.1x IEEE standard. And then the Wi-Fi key is negotiated without user intervention typically, and it's based on credentials in the device. In this case, credentials that come from the SIM card. This is controlled by operator-provided configuration that ships on the phones. So that comes in two forms, automatic, pre-installed, and then the sort of manual approach. So we'll have a look at the automatic configuration. So a number of Android and Windows phones automatically connect based on the SIM. Essentially, when you put the SIM card in, they then select a pre-configured profile from an operator and set it up on the device. Same occurs on iOS. It activates a specific kind of .mobile config, and the types of things that it configures are, in case of the stuff we're interested in here, is operator-specific SSIDs. So the device then starts to look, is configured to look for those SSIDs. And just, we did an analysis of iOS 9, just jailbroken phone, and found more than 60 profiles spanning 44 countries that provide for 802.1x Wi-Fi. And that contains 66 unique SSIDs, plus a bunch of other random config in there as well. But the sort of upshoot of this is that phones are continually trying silently to automatically authenticate to these SSIDs. Manual configuration, well, that's sort of less of a concern, but it's still basically with some of these Android phones and I think some Windows phones as well, you basically have to do an initial step that's on the website, and then you go through it. And then after you've done that, and then it automatically connects. Android's got some carrier control mechanisms for potentially enabling some of this stuff as well. So this automatic Wi-Fi authentication, as I said, it's IEEE 802.1x. It uses another standard, extensible authentication protocol, which is known as EAP, and it's specified in this RFC 3748 from the IETF. And it's basically EAP over LAN, or in other words, it's catchily named EPOL, goes over Wi-Fi. And then the two specific methods, EAP methods, that we're interested in, which are actually the methods that are used to do the authentication for these services, are EAP SIM, which is based on GSM security, which is currently the most widely used for the Wi-Fi access point authentication. And then you've got EAP ACA, which is 3G-based security, and that is under deployment now. The support for these protocols in pretty much most of the world's sort of smartphone OSs, so Android, iOS, Windows Mobile, BlackBerry. I spoke to all of those guys and let them know basically I started talking to Apple back in April last year about it, and they weren't too concerned initially, but didn't really hear very much. But then a few months later, they suddenly spun up and realized that maybe this was a bit of an issue, and they took it pretty seriously. So I talked with them for some months about it and how one could address it, really. But it's tricky because it's not just a bug fix. And I also spoke to some of the operators and the GSMA about the issues. It's deployed in many countries, and adoption is growing at the moment. So let's dig into the actual protocols themselves. So what's going on? So basically, you have three basic identity types for this protocol. You've got the permanent identity, which is the one that we're interested in, the IMSI, which is typically the permanent identity. And this is used initially when the phone connects, typically, and after which a temporary ID is used, which is actually this fast reauthentication identity, the sort of third one down, which provides a lower overhead for reattachment after the initial exchange. And then there's a third identity called the pseudonym identity, which can be a pseudonym for the IMSI and has a limited lifespan. And so when you send it over the wire, you're not sort of sending the real IMSI. But the behavior of the protocol is configured by this, or controlled by this, what's called a peer policy. And there are two sort of two options there. Basically, you've got a liberal peer, which is the current default, and it basically responds to any request for permanent identity. So basically, you can ask the phone for it to do a full authentication, which basically means send me your IMSI. And there's no protection against that up until fairly recently. There's conservative peer, which is the second peer policy, which is a future deployment option, but it is under deployment, although I've yet to actually see it in action, but I haven't been looking everywhere. And it only responds to requests for a permanent identity when no pseudonym is available. And this is a feature that is part of this protocol, the IPSIM and ACA. I mean, these protocols were written like a decade ago, believe it or not, and the conservative peer stuff is actually being deployed into iOS 10, actually as a result of this work. So the EAP protocol is sadly not encrypted, but in some senses that's not a big problem, because I mean you've got to have layers and layers. You don't necessarily have to build encryption in at every layer, but unfortunately, in the case of the Wi-Fi access point authentication, EPOL is not encrypted and is not sent an encrypted channel. So thus, the IMSI is basically visible on initial connect, and it's also visible on basically rather a simple attack, the full authentication attack. So that's the sort of first couple of gotchas with that protocol. Well, the protocol that's deployed for doing Wi-Fi access point authentication. Although you'll be happy to hear the actual Wi-Fi access keys are not compromised, so the content is still protected. It's just your IMSI. There are encrypted tunnels that could be used to protect this transaction, but currently they're not used. We'll look at that a bit later. Whoops, I think I double did that slide. And then we got the Wi-Fi calling connection. So what happens here is the phone, it can connect to Wi-Fi however it likes, at home or through the work or an operator-run access point. And what happens is the voice calls are rerouted from typically, say, in iOS, for example, you just flip it on in the preferences, and in the normal telephone app, you wouldn't know the difference unless you look at the top and it says Wi-Fi calling enabled. And that'll typically happen when you've got no coverage or like bad signal. In fact, you can kind of force it to come on by flipping it into airplane mode, and then turning on Wi-Fi. If your phone's enabled for it, it'll then fire up the Wi-Fi calling feature. So it seems better with Wi-Fi calling. The connection to the Edge Packet Data Gateway uses IPsec and authenticates using IKE v2, and it's supported on iOS, Android, and Windows again, which I also mentioned to them about this issue. Now, just have a little brief IPsec overview for those of you who aren't familiar. You've got the IPsec Internet Protocol Security, which is actually a suite of protocols and provides confidentiality and data integrity access control. And then actually within that sort of suite, you have the authentication, header, AH, and confidentiality, encapsulating security payload, ESP, and then you've got key management, which is what we're interested in here, this IKE v2. There's been quite a few sort of versions of IKE. It sort of started with something called Oakley, I think, and then we had IKE v1, and now we're on to v2. But IKE v2, it operates in two modes. You've got tunnel mode and transport mode. The tunnel mode is used for connection to the Edge Packet Data Gateway. So the IKE is, it connects in a couple of phases. You've got the SA init phase, where you negotiate the cryptographic algorithms and do a Diffie-Hellman exchange. And then the Diffie-Hellman exchange allows you to then essentially sort of like build up a pair of shared keys. And then the IKE auth stage then is encrypted using these Diffie-Hellman keys. And this exchange, the IKE auth exchange, contains the IMSI. It performs the IPACA protocol in the IKE auth phase, exchanging the IMSI there. But unfortunately, the Diffie-Hellman exchange isn't actually protected by a certificate. It's not authenticated. So essentially, it's open to a man-in-the-middle attack. So you can set up a malicious endpoint and just do a DNS redirect for the Edge Packet Data Gateway, and you then pretend to be the Edge Packet Data Gateway, and you catch the IMSI again, the second technique. Again, the actual call content is still safe. It's not corrupted at this, compromised at this point. So those are the two issues. So what can be done? Well, the EAP-SIM is actually not particularly great. There are other issues, and as you probably aware, like 2G security is not terrific. And so it's a good move to move towards IPACA for like everything, for the Wi-Fi access point stuff, and it's already mandated for the Wi-Fi calling. So that is actually happening. I have seen operators now basically only using IPACA for the authentication, and then there's also deployment of this conservative peer mode with pseudonyms. So that should really be deployed as well. So then that basically reduces the exposure to for the devices basically to get hold of their IMSI. And now the next stage is really to provide like a certificate-based approach where you where you then run these authentication protocols in tunnels. Now, there's sort of already standards out there which allow for this. So you've got something called TTLS, which essentially is just using a tunneled TLS or SSL, depending on how you want to, well, TLS is specifically a protocol. So that can run over 802.1x, and there's a possibility you can also run it within IPsec. And you can then tunnel this authentication again. Or there are other options within IPsec where you've got multiple authentication exchanges. But the catch for some of these is that that they will increase the round trip times, and there'll be additional round trip times for the security protocol exchange to happen, which then has impacts on latency in terms of how fast your phone actually connects to the Wi-Fi or connects to the Wi-Fi calling services. Although you'd be forgiven for thinking that they don't really care that much about it at the moment, because if you look at how fast your phone sort of reconnects, say, to the Wi-Fi on the underground, it's not exactly snappy. It takes like seconds, maybe tens of seconds sometimes, to get around to reconnecting. So latency doesn't seem to be top of their list right now. So it would seem that additional level of security could be good. But it does mean that certificates have to be deployed within the AAA infrastructure, within the mobile infrastructure, and they also have to have support for it in the end systems that run in the networks and run in the phones, and the operators need to actually say, let's deploy this stuff. And then there's other potential solutions, like you can encrypt the IMSI using some other techniques. This work has been done as part of this European research project that I'm on called 5G Ensure, and one of the partners has come up with a way of encrypting the IMSI, which is another option, and at least that it can protect you. But the problem is that then also requires some other deployments within the network, so it's not for free either. There are other older standards that have been around, certificate-based protection of IMSI. This is another 3GPP. It's not really a standard, actually. It's just a sort of proposition from quite some time ago. But anyway, it's probably a good point for standards bodies to sort of have a look at, reevaluate some of the approaches in terms of their recommendations. So mobile OS mitigations. So we need to support this conservative peer mode, which is emerging in some OSs, and as I mentioned, iOS 10 does have conservative peer, which was developed as a result of us reporting these issues to Apple, and that will provide definitely a better measure of protection. And I think that's the first step that the people are looking to, the GSMA and so on. And then the certificate-based approach, where you need to deploy TTLS, missing the S there, and in IKV2. And maybe there's some other approaches that potentially could solve this out. But and then there's things like, it'd be nice if people were allowed to turn off some of this automatic stuff that just gets preloaded into their phone. There's a lot of things that get done automatically for people, and it's not possible to turn a lot of this off very easily. So we're looking at user mitigation. It's you got Wi-Fi network access control. You can turn off the auto join stuff for auto Wi-Fi networks, but only when the network's in range. So you've got to wait till one pops up and then quickly turn it off. And in theory, you've got conservative peer, but then in Android, you can forget the network as well. But this also depends on the version and again, like whether it's in network range. And with Wi-Fi calling, there's not really much you can do apart from just switch it off. Or potentially switching off Wi-Fi in untrusted environments. I guess some of you might be aware of some of the work from Project Zero out of Google that developed some attacks on the actual embedded Wi-Fi stacks that basically the whole of the Wi-Fi stack is now being implemented on the Wi-Fi chips themselves. And these guys at Google essentially used some other work that had basically reverse engineered the firmware running on these Wi-Fi chips and realized there were bugs in there that could be exploited by just sending particular packets crafted, which would then grant you root in the application processor by while doing an attack first on the Wi-Fi hardware, and then you could then get uncontrolled access to memory and dropping through that way. That's the snag with some of these offloading. There's a lot of these additional systems that are starting to appear within say phones. You've got memory controllers that are then a separate memory controller chip. But so in this case, Wi-Fi, we're looking to try and make some better protection. I mean, essentially, there aren't really great privacy mandates in the standards. The privacy stuff around protection of the IMSI is kind of optional, and I think these need to be made stronger when these things are put together. And then widespread device configuration with no opt-out starts to become an issue when it compromises security. And the other thing that seems to me is that there are phones out there, security testing for them, but this was just run Wireshark in monitor mode and have your phone connect to an operator-run Wi-Fi access point, and up pops the IMSI. I mean, there are certain identifiers that you would hope that manufacturers would just sort of do some sort of base scan for to see whether they're just flying out of the wire, sort of unencrypted, which doesn't really seem to have happened, which is kind of disappointing. Hopefully they'll be taking the message home. But yeah, these two techniques rely upon features that are implemented in most of the world's smartphones right now, and fixing it is not just one patch. You've got to work with the vendors, the mobile OS manufacturers to basically implement the features, and then have the operators actually switch those features on. And then we're going to see a bit better protection in this space. As I said, I think IPACA is now starting to replace IPSIM on some of the networks. I've been seeing that happening, so that's a good thing. But we'll have to see how it goes on into the future. I guess it's tricky with these talking about these things in public. The guys who implement this stuff don't want you to talk about it, and there's never probably a great time to talk about them, I suppose, until they've actually fixed them. But with things like this, they're not that easy to fix. No one person can fix them, so no one person sort of, in some senses, takes the blame either. So I guess getting the message out there that there is this problem, and it's really not that hard to exploit. Hopefully get things moving a little bit quicker. So I think I've basically, future work, we're still looking at other uses of ACA eSIM, and then looking at the use of USIM credentials in other Wi-Fi-based protocols and other protocols, because it was news to me actually when I first started looking at this that the USIM credentials were being communicated up into the OS level. I'd assumed they were sort of staying down in the baseband, but no, they've been used at the OS level for a while now. As I said, this is part of the 5G Endure project, which is EU Horizon 2020 project, this thing here. But the actual original motivation for the work was sort of personal. I was just sitting on the phone on the tube one day, and I looked at my phone, and I saw there's a Wi-Fi network my phone's connected to. I didn't type that in. I didn't type in a password. What's going on? And so basically, I just dug down, found the protocols, and then realized there were some pretty serious issues with them. So finished a little bit early, but questions and thoughts?